episode of the All Walks of Life podcast. In today's episode, I sat down with someone really special. I sat down with Dr. Sandeep Shukla. He's the HOD of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Kanpur. IIT Kanpur is one of the premier institutions in India, and he's doing some really interesting work in computer science and how he's trying to take a more lab-based approach to computer science. So it was a real pleasure speaking to him. Some of the topics that we discussed in today's conversation included are we living in a computational simulation, which is an interest of mine because I've been fascinated by that thought. And it was just interesting to speak to someone who actually shared a similar insight into that kind of a philosophical thought experiment. Moreover, we also spoke about some of the laws over privacy and cybersecurity in India and worldwide as well. Aspects such as censorship on mediums such as Twitter and YouTube, and how big data companies such as Google, Apple, Amazon are taking advantage of that, and we as a general public aren't always aware when we're putting our data out there. Some of the other things we looked at were consciousness, and how Dr. Sandeep Shukla also felt that consciousness is something that's within us. It's not a mystical source that we look into the outer world. It was, in short, it was a great conversation, and I feel that you will really enjoy the next 1.5 hours of our conversation. So do feel free to support the YouTube channel and anywhere else that you find the podcast. And yeah, enjoy the podcast. Right. Dr. Sandeep Shukla, welcome to the All Walks of Life podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
How have you been spending your time during the quarantine period then, sir?
Well, first 40 days we were locked out, locked down. So therefore, the problem was that we were stuck at home. And what I do is very lab-based. And anyway, so we managed to do some work from home. But then in the third phase, we were allowed to be back in office. So right now, I am back in office for last 3 weeks. So that's good. So we are able to do some work.
So because I go to university in the UK, and we've been having online lectures, and our examinations have been put online as well. So what is the structure at IIT Kanpur? Are you holding a similar approach of having lectures online and sharing content online, or how is the approach at IIT Kanpur?
No, actually, even before the lockdown started, our students went on, they went on spring break, and they were told not to come back. So at this point, what happened is that I did a survey, and many of my colleagues did a survey of students in their classes online to see how them would be able to, participate in online classes. Turns out that, for example, in my class of 70, at least 10 among the about 50 who responded said that their bandwidth situation is not good and they won't be able to, do anything. So therefore, the problem happened is that at some point we were talking about using online recorded lectures and send them to students and so on. But that was abandoned because if 50 people responded out of 70, that means other 20 may not be even getting the emails because they are from various places in India, including villages. Some were probably in Kashmir, where there was only 4G was not even allowed. So 2G bandwidth was not enough. So therefore, it was decided not to do it that way. And so we were asked to create online, material that may be videos, that may be PDF files for creating the kind of lecture material so that students can actually at least learn. but that also eventually was not made very public. So what happened is that last week the institute made a decision that they are going to have the semester declared closed, and
Right.
the grade will be based on what was done before the spring break, where we already had the midterm exam already done, and some of the midterm uh, evaluations were done. So based on that, plus if any faculty did online interaction with the students, they can also include that in their grading scheme, provided that all of the students in the class were able to participate in that online activity. So,
Right.
so now we are going
So
to
that's
send it
very interesting. That's
just for the sake of
yeah, go
complete.
on.
No grading will be done based on the material that was covered now after the lockdown.
Mm. Question was more about, let's say, you talked about how you were considering providing lectures online, but you got the survey from your students that most of them wouldn't be able to access online lectures. My whole
Not most,
concept
but
of this was
there
that,
was a percent.
yeah,
Most.
but
Hmm.
so let's say
uh,
let's bring this question into point that in a country like India, where we have, let's say, probably the cheapest internet connection that one can get, yet there's
yeah.
still pockets of India where it's difficult to get internet connection. So I wanted to pose this question to you and understand what are your thought points on, let's say, neutrality, and do you think an aspect of Internet of Things should be brought about in the public?
Yeah, so I think the biggest problem we have is that there are only so BSNL was decimated by many years of mismanagement and the apathy of the government, and then the companies like Geo kind of decimated the other companies as well with the help of the government. So therefore, Airtel and Vodafone are the only options other than Reliance Jio. But in some sense, Geo has become kind of a monopoly in some areas,
Yeah.
and therefore, and there is not enough regulatory oversight, and therefore, large parts of India are not having proper connection. Even we actually get a lot of problems sometimes on our network.
Hmm.
Also, we have a tendency to shut down internet, like even last week, I believe some places in West Bengal where there was government shutdown of the internet, and we saw that back in January we were not allowed to have any data connection on any of the telecommunication services. So overall, I think there is not enough. I think competition is not good. It's not a very competitive environment. So in the US, it would have gotten into antitrust law and
Yeah.
into trouble. But unfortunately, here we are worse in our crony capitalism than even the US. So therefore, these companies seems to be companies seem to be not worried about any kind of consequences for spotty services, bad bandwidth compared to what they actually promise, the quality of service, disconnection all the time. All that stuff is goes without any kind of adverse consequence. I'm not surprised that a lot of areas don't have the right coverage.
Do you think this is an aspect that should be looked upon more by, let's say, the government? Because there are so many, it's an upcoming industry, let's say the digital content creation industry, and
Mm.
there are so many businesses who have such a big presence on, let's say, the internet. So
Yeah.
as you mentioned, with states such as West Bengal, who went into a major shutdown of the
Mm.
internet, and other states like Odisha as well. So do you think there should be more, let's say, I wouldn't say monitoring in that sense, but just a sort of regulation of how things can be monitored and things can be regulated, with aspects of the internet, because there's so many businesses who have a presence online, and with the internet shutting down even for, let's say, a day, it causes major harm to their business.
Yeah. So I think I completely agree that our regulatory structure has to be revamped. It has to be made corruption free, and it has to be the regulatory framework should be properly implemented. Whatever regulations we have, I think we have on paper we have lot of the regulation, including net neutrality, etc., which was under threat for some time, but I think it is still there. And so I think that it's just the enforcement of regulation and rules of law, and the courts are uh, not taking suo motu cognizance of this denial of the internet by either the government or the companies themselves. Uh, uh, so all kinds of things that needs to change drastically. We actually try to leapfrog ourselves, so we are now talking about 5G.
Right.
And you will hear government also talks about 5G and all that stuff, but we don't have proper 3G even in most places, in many places. 4G is working at a 3G speed. So I think that we do talk big, but we have very little actually to in terms of availability of the right type of services.
So it's all well and good for us to talk about, let's say, that there should be more regulation on, let's say, the internet. But one can easily point out that if we have more regulation, we can easily fall into the trap of, let's say, what has recently been propagated by the government of the Arogya Setu app, of how people will be tracked of their if they're COVID patients on their day-to-day activities and activities through the application. Don't you think that there is a fine line to draw between this, because we can easily fall under, let's say, the China South Korea camp, of where the government is totally watching every step we do? So do you think there's a balance to play?
I think, yeah. So I think you're right though. So regulation, when I talk about regulation, I talk about regulating the companies. But the tendency here is to regulate the people and deregulate the companies.
Yeah.
So that's the opposite of what regulation should be. So we have seen this, forcing of Aadhaar, forcing of Arogya Setu, forcing of whatever citizenship laws and all that stuff. So we are seeing this immense amount of assault on public, people's privacy, even though the Supreme Court has declared privacy as a fundamental right, but there is a huge assault on privacy. Second problem we are seeing is that with respect to these is that a lot of these things are actually in a federated structure. A lot of these things are under the jurisdiction of the state rather than the center. So, for example, health is actually jurisdiction of the state, I believe, and education is in the joint list. Similarly, something like Aadhaar, which is supposed to be the state or the district level people know everybody better than somebody sitting in a data warehouse in Delhi or someplace. So all that stuff should have been done at the in a federated structure rather than in a centralization process. So that itself is actually not only is reducing the scope of democracy and scope of federalism, and we are seeing that. But on the other hand, if you look at all the industries, like industries are cutting forests, mining companies are taking away lands from the tribes. The people are, the religious gurus are polluting Yamuna River a couple of years ago, and Green Tribunal fined them. They defied that without any consequence. So all these people who should have been regulated, are not being regulated, right? So whereas we are seeing the people who should be protected through regulation are being put under immense amount of assault on in terms of regulatory procedure. Even now, what I was reading is that even to go into a flight, you have to have Arogya Setu,
Yeah.
so this kind of stuff. So,
I,
so I think that everything has been turned on its head.
as someone who's brought up in the 21st century and who understands what's actually happening in the world, I find this extremely scary, if I have to put it, because I see so many parallels when you're comparing it to a communist regime, let's say in China, of how similar India is going in the tracks of, let's say, China in approaching their economy and their foreign policy in that sense. And then when
Mm.
I look at, let's say people in America, even they have discussed about what's happening in China and even in India, of how people are going through, let's say, these tracking regimes. And some people are actually in favor of it because they say that maybe it will actually help us prevent COVID cases. But then someone can easily flip that and say that if they're collecting data from us now for, let's say, this disease, what's to say that they won't use our data in a future event? Because data is so powerful right now, it's like giving away oil, as
Yes.
many people have put
Also,
it.
there is no proof. Anybody has not. So it's been 2-3 months since this apps have been put in place in many countries, right? And I didn't see any proof, any empirical proof that these apps have actually been able to stop anything.
Yeah, yeah,
In India, 100 million people have downloaded this app and probably more. But in India, look at the scenario right now. We are going up by 7,000 per day.
yeah,
So I think that uh, so our whole approach to the problem, so throwing in technology to where you actually need real intervention, real door-to-door survey. The way the Kerala has done it, they didn't use any app. They actually used the ASHA workers and other grassroots people to actually go door to door to actually work on figuring out what's happening. So and but if COVID could be stopped by an app, then
mm,
it would be easy to do it, but it's not
yeah.
happening. So,
Well, that's certainly very interesting. And if I want to build upon this whole cybersecurity and cyber welfare aspect of things, because I know you're researching a lot in this spectrum, and you spend time in the US where things are more liberal, let's say China and things.
mm,
So one of the arguments that's often been pushed in the US is that yes, people may say there's, let's say, a trade war between the US and China. However, China will never be able to compete with the US because US will always promote innovation, which is very difficult to find when you're always constantly being looked at by, let's say, a government
mm,
agent or someone who's already always looking at the. Whereas if you have a little more freedom, that's why the best and the brightest go to the US, because there is still this aspect of the free land, the free and the land of the free. So do you think that exists, and do you think that innovation can only come in, let's say, a liberal society, or do you think it can propagate in, let's say,
so,
a
so,
more
so
regimented society?
actually, China has done a couple of things that made them quite advanced in technology. One is that in the beginning, they have stolen a lot of intellectual property uh, uh, by various means, by reverse engineering chips, putting them under microscope and all kinds of stuff, right? And then on top of that, I think that their people are very hardworking, so they have been able to. So they are not doing probably very fundamental discoveries and inventions, but they are actually very good in technology. So I think that China is, far ahead of countries like India in terms of technology and in terms of advancement of technology. They actually produce their own chips. They actually produce their own operating system. They actually have their own equivalent of Google. They have
Yeah,
own equivalent of Amazon. They have own
everything
equivalent of
basically. Yeah,
WhatsApp. So I
yeah.
think, or Facebook. So I think that they are far more advanced, irrespective of whether they are in a more repressive regime or not. I think the one thing that China has done is that in terms of education, so they have invested a lot in education and infrastructure, right? So their investment in education has really paid off. So their universities, they have some of the top universities. They have huge research labs. They actually have universities that are dedicated to a subject. Like I know, I know a university in northern China, which is basically on power system, and that university is bigger than many US universities just for power grid, power system, etc. And they also spent a lot of money inviting people. My colleagues at Virginia Tech used to go regularly to China for extended period to go there and advise them on research and all that stuff. So I think irrespective of whether the government is looking at your shoulder, they have done well. That doesn't mean that that's a very good way to live. I don't think that living in such an oppressive regime would be very good, but certainly they have done it. Now the question is that whether Americans are more innovative compared to others. That has to do with their school education system. So I have relatives who are living there since childhood, and they go to school, and they actually are not. First of all, they don't have to worry about JEE and competitive exams or a statewide exam, nationwide exam, this kind of stuff. The schools are trusted to actually evaluate them, and only standardized tests are SAT and GRE, etc.
ACT, yeah.
But in the school, I saw how they teach for subjects like history, geography, anything. Is everything is a project. They actually do their own research. They actually come up with posters. They go and present those posters. So they know how to explore, and they know how to actually articulate their thoughts. Whereas here we are told to mug up history, mug up geography, and reproduce what is given to us in that way. So I think that the education system in the US is quite responsible for their ability to be thinking out of the box and innovate. Uh, uh, the second thing that in US did back in maybe 50s and 60s and 70s to open it up for the whole world, especially for graduate education and even for some undergraduate education. So they could attract the top brains from countries like Israel, Russia, Italy, China, India, Iran. So that basically helped them huge. Like, so many of the large companies, very innovative companies in the US are built by immigrants. So I think that that openness actually helped them a lot in terms of like whole Silicon Valley, right? So if you look at the Silicon Valley, the Andy Groves was an immigrant who actually was one of the three founders of Intel, right? So same thing with
Steve
companies like
Wozniak and several others, yeah.
Many companies, and also very early on the universities were very involved in entrepreneurship. Like Cisco came out of Stanford, Sun came out of Stanford, Yahoo came out of Stanford, Google came out of Stanford. So you can imagine that the kind of so our students are always running after like the JEE, then the grade points, then they're running after the placement. The placement is huge in IIT. So everybody is thinking in terms of placement and package. But that is not the end of life, and that is not how to actually succeed in life. But nobody is telling them that, and they are also kind of in a rat race. Like they're like somebody is getting a better package than me, so that is not something that they accept. So therefore, they are always doing this. So therefore, the innovative thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, these are missing. So for example, the incubators that IITs have, like for creating startups, hardly ever the IIT students actually take advantage of that, or even go for that, because it's too risky. So we see students from other lesser places than IITs, etc., will come and actually start something there, and some of them succeed. So I think that our education system makes us less critical, less ability to think, rather than only learn, and then also less ability to take risk. So if you don't take risk, the gain is less. So that's
Yeah.
that's all that stuff together will make us behind.
I totally agree with those points, like
Mm.
especially in the whole aspect of the education curriculum. I think it needs a revamp, or at least a looking into of how we should actually approach things on a wide level or even a national level. But when
Right.
looking at things, let's say the American landscape of things, do you think that America was able to open out to the world and, let's say, to call for the best and brightest minds because they didn't really have an identity of what is American? Because America is a country of, let's say, immigrants. The immigrants were the ones who took over the land from, let's say, the Native Americans. So there isn't, let's say, an association from what one would call American. An American could be anyone who's gone there and set up something for a living. So do you think that played a role? And let's say for
So
things like India, that would be difficult because India has a sense of what Indianness is, who an Indian is, if that makes sense.
no, I think Americans were quite parochial. So if you look at the history, right? So if you look at the history of America, until they have a terrible notion of what American means. Americans means
Yeah.
basically Anglo-Saxon whites.
Hmm.
Even Italians, when they first came, they were Catholics, so they were discriminated against. Irish were discriminated against. Then the blacks have been,
Yeah.
enslaved for hundreds of years, and then even after emancipation, it took another almost close to 100 years for them to actually get civil rights, right? So and then if you look at how Sikhs were treated back in early 1900, etc. So I don't think that it is, so they have a notion of Americanness which is misplaced in my opinion, because real Americans are the ones who are actually in colonies, in the original American Indians. But even today, the reason why Trump is getting so much support is because of this misplaced notion of who is American. So
Yeah.
they want to throw out Mexicans, they want to throw out Muslims, they want to throw out Chinese. So and Trump is basically exploiting those prejudices. So I think people are prejudicial everywhere. It's a lack of leadership that is here. So America, after Second World War, emerged as a world leader, and as a world leader, their leadership has had this mentality that as a world leader we have a responsibility. Of course, uh, that was also misplaced in terms of overreaching in places like Korea, in Vietnam, etc. But at least they actually had assumed a leadership position in terms of international movements like the the Union, what do you call it, the United Nations, in
Yeah.
terms of UNESCO, in terms of creating what is like WHO, etc., and or in terms of creating NATO, etc. So of course, they actually also had many misplaced notions which borders on imperialism. They actually, for some reason, was afraid of communism.
Hmm.
They had an irrational fear of communism, and then that led to Cold War and all that stuff. A lot of nuclear armament race and a lot of bad decisions. But at least they, assuming a leadership role, they felt that they have a responsibility, and also they had a cultural superiority. And by that time, they actually assumed a cultural superiority. So at that time, they started through their embassies and everything. They started this United States educational foundations all over the world, like USEFI. So they used to actually take poets and writers and people from various countries back to US for some time to tell them how great the American systems are and all the stuff. But in the process, they actually also created a cultural diversity, right? So I know a lot of 1970s, 60s Bengali poets and writers. They actually got an opportunity to go to the US in Iowa writing workshop and things like that, and many of them stayed back. So there is a diversity that they could create because of all this. Some of it is maybe coincidental, some of it could be also planned, but I think that by that process they have gained a lot of intellectual capital that by themselves they would not have gotten. So I think what we miss here is that see, Indianness and all that stuff, I think, is also a very misplaced concept, because India has gone through many waves of invasion, like starting from theory of Aryan invasion to people from Central Asia, then people from Mongolia, then people from Afghanistan area, and then later on the British and all that stuff. So of course Indianness is there. They have been able to assimilate all these different cultures, and that's what actually, if you look at the 1900 intellectuals, they used to take pride in this assimilative nature of our culture. So if you read Tagore and others at that time, they would talk about this assimilative culture that India is. It's actually a melting pot of so many different cultures over centuries, and now suddenly we have this new strange notion of Indianness, which is related to 5,000 years ago what India was, and that is not helping at all. So that is actually we are bad with respect to immigration, with respect to accepting diversity. So African nationals, they often come to India for education, and there has been cases where they have been heckled, they have been pushed around, and even northeastern states, people, they get heckled and all that stuff. They're called Chinese and all that. So I think that overall, I think we have gone through a cultural degradation because being uneducated, being unintellectual has been made like what Trump is doing to the Americans. So we have done that to here, is that being all those, prejudicial is now something to take pride in, which is basically a development of cultural diversity, and instead of evolving, we are devolving. So coming back to your question, like why US able to do this and India has not been able to do this, I think it's a turn in history that after World War II, that Americans assumed a world leadership position, and that led them to open up a lot more. And also they had to take in a lot of Jewish people during the genocides in Germany and other places. So that they found that actually helped them, enrich them. The whole Manhattan Project, which actually put them on top of the power power structure, that actually was von Neumann, Einstein, name it. They were all immigrants. So I think that opened their eye that this is how it should be, and that kind of experience we haven't gotten.
No, that's certainly very interesting. I mean, coming back to the India stuff which you mentioned, I've forgotten who actually said was a really strong thing, and it stuck with me. So he mentioned that India isn't one large population; it's a country of small populations, and this plays a vital role in what you mentioned, that how, let's say, some parts of India are unaccepting of people of India. In other parts, let's say the north of India is seems to be in a more hierarchical structure, and they find anyone who comes from, let's say, the northeast or even South India to be not a part of India, and to be a
Right.
part of a lesser part of India. That makes sense. So I think that plays a massive role when you're looking at how India is functioning as a country right now.
Right.
But coming on to the more computer science element and what you're teaching is, so something I want to talk to you about was, let's say, where do you see the future for artificial intelligence? Do you think, are you in the lines of, let's say, what Elon Musk says, that artificial intelligence is almost inevitable, and for us to stay alive as human beings, we have to join them? And what he means by that is the whole Neuralink work that he's been doing. Are you aware of the work that Elon Musk is doing in this
Yeah.
spectrum?
So Elon Musk, I think is often jumps to conclusion too early. So, but I believe that AI is going to be inevitable in the sense that, to me, AI is right now is algorithmic, right? So you have machine learning, you have the ability to crunch a lot of data to make get information out of the data, right? Or do
Yeah.
some prediction out of the data. You have the ability to actually recognize faces, transform voices, read stuff automatically, translate quite well automatically, this kind of stuff. But in terms of cognitive ability to innovate, etc., we are still not there. But there are a lot of predictions that even that will happen, because eventually the innovation is a matter of synthetic activity, right? Synthesis of various knowledge that you have gathered. So if AI can learn from many examples, it probably will be able to create a new thing that also does something even better by optimizing certain features and so on. So I think that AI will certainly grow, and we'll see more and more of it. Who I mean, I have been driving. I was driving in the US for 20 years. I remember the time when there was no Google, there was no Google, no Yahoo. We used to have some maps in big booklets, and then we need a navigator next to us who and we would go to the AAA, the Automobile Association, to ask them to mark the road before we undertook a long distance travel and all that stuff. From there, now real time, I was getting, when I was driving, I was getting real time information, like which path is congested and what would be the alternate paths, small back roads and all that stuff, which itself has been quite helpful. But on the other hand, it has made us dumber. Now I have no sense of direction. I totally am dependent on Google. So if Google somehow doesn't work, then I am in big trouble, right? So same thing in terms of language translation. And also nowadays you see, a lot of the time we actually take a language and put it in Google Translate, and get some sense of what it is. So we don't, so after a while, our ability to translate ourselves and stuff will actually gradually disappear. In terms of spoken, one thing that has happened is that a lot of the services you call, they actually have an AI assisted, response system, IVR kind of thing. And it is extremely annoying sometimes, because sometimes it's not in their whole pathway that I am the kind of unique problem I have. I cannot get to any of the menus that navigates through, and then it takes a long time. It takes a long time to get to a real person behind. So all that stuff will obviously create a lot of friction in terms of how we are used to live and how we are living now, and it will be even further aggravated as AI becomes lot more pervasive. And very soon, I think, and there has been a lot of work already that our teaching and everything will be AI based, right? So AI will decide based on the students' interaction with the lesson, how long they actually take to answer a question, etc. It will actually navigate to the next lesson based on the students' cognitive abilities and all that stuff. And soon the way we teach will become different, right? So as a teacher, it will be very very emasculating to actually when there is an AI assisted thing that is telling me the thing I have been doing for so long is not the right way to do this. On the other hand, it will actually probably give more personalized education, because in a class of 100 we don't reach everybody equally, and AI will probably help that bridge that gap. So there will be advantages and disadvantages, and there will be some friction for a while. Now the time that the thing that people talk about in terms of robots will take over and will be subservient to the robots and stuff, I think that part I haven't subscribed to yet, because that probably is very long in the future. But who knows, maybe we are the robots, right? so so we are the robots of somebody's creation. So
Yeah, yeah. So
so
that's the whole interesting. Sorry to cut you off, but
yeah.
that was the whole interesting thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I was reading this in an interview that you mentioned. This was very early on when you were in Virginia Tech. So you mentioned that I want to live in a world of abstraction rather than that one that is concrete. This is not a good idea for an engineer, but a very good one for a computer scientist. So this brings us to the whole concept of, let's say, what's called the computational hypothesis. So
Yeah.
this is I think propagated by Nick Bostrom at Oxford, who says that we may be living in a computational simulation. So
Yes.
how much truth do you think there is to this? Because he's quite, let's say, persuasive in the way he presents it. He talks about probability theory, and if you look at the probability theory, it is very likely that we are in a computational simulation. So as a computer scientist, how much heed do you pay to this, or do you think it's just a conspiracy theory?
Well, I don't know about the conspiracy theory, but I think that that's a possibility. So when I first so in 1999 I watched the movie The Matrix. I don't know if you have seen it.
Yeah, of
So
course, yeah.
and I was blown away by the concept. Right. Before that, I never thought about it. I always had a thought. So there is this book by Richard Dawkins called
Yeah.
about the
God
genes,
delusion?
right?
Oh, okay, a gene based.
No, that is God delusion is different, but this is about the how the we are actually habitats for the genes. Genes actually decide,
Yeah.
how we look and how we go around and how what we eat, etc., in order to feed themselves and feed themselves for survival and propagation, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually a other level that from the micro level we are talking about microorganisms, or not even organisms, some chemicals that are deciding who we are and how we are built and how we interact and how what we eat, etc. But on the other hand, the computer simulation is the other way, that we are simulation, and then we are so usually simulations of large scale usually don't have deterministic agents, right? All the agents eventually interact, and then they have various non-deterministic paths. That's why the life is so non-deterministic. So it's quite probable that that is the case. And then Stephen Hawking wrote this book with another Caltech professor. I forgot the name of the book. I read it like 5-6 years, maybe more than that years ago. In that, he was talking about multiverse theory and the probability about the probability favors this universe rather than the other universe, but other universes also exist in probability and all that concepts. Not that I grasped it fully, but I think that probability is there, that is part of a matrix.
No, that's very interesting. And I know you mentioned that maybe Elon Musk jumps to conclusion very often, but so what he pointed out was he's also he doesn't say that he totally believes in this, but he says that it is quite likely that it could be true. And what he
Yeah.
points out is that if we are living in a computational simulation, he would like to find out what's on the other side. So who's actually running the computational simulation? Do you have
Right.
any idea of how big a supercomputer would it have to be to design something as, let's say, our universe? Or have you
Mm.
ever thought about that?
So there was this other book that you must have seen or read. This Douglas Adams book on the regarding the the computer simulation, and the result was 42, right?
Yeah.
So so the no so I think that our notion of computer might be very
Exactly. Yeah.
limited, right? So when we say a simulation on a computer, we are thinking in terms of our silicon based computer,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
maybe the entire universe is a computer which is computing in a very different way. It doesn't have the kind of structure, CPU, etc. It has other ways of doing computation. So I don't know how to even measure how big a computer it would be or something, because the entire system may be a computing, the entire universe may be a computing in progress.
No, that's very interesting, because we may perceive it to be something that's very quantum mechanical, a quantum mechanical system, because that's our understanding through, let's say, mathematics, physics, and how we perceive the world. But as you're saying, it could be something that's totally mystical, something in our senses that we can't perceive of,
Hmm.
that computational thing is working. So
Right.
this draws upon something that's very interesting, and so because this is like one of the main reasons that I've been interested about the whole computational simulation argument is that when we, because of the propagation of, let's say, virtual reality, and then
Hmm.
I'm not sure if you've tried virtual reality, but when I've tried it, and when I go into a virtual reality world, and after I
Hmm.
complete my game and come out of it, that seems very much like a sort of universe in itself. And when
Hmm.
I come out of it into the real world, I feel that I'm missing out, and this is sort of a lesser, let's say, lesser world in that sense, and I was enjoying myself much more in that. So do
Hmm.
you think that there's also possibility that okay, this is a computational simulation, but then we can also be creating several other computational simulations while we're going, let's say, through virtual reality or artificial intelligence and things like that?
Yes, so I think yeah, as I was saying, that I think most simulations are not fully controlled, right? So simulations are set up, and they're let on, and then they run on their own. They actually discover things, agents
Yeah.
discover things, and
Yeah.
agents actually interact, and those interactions are unpredictable. So there may be different scenarios that play out. So yes, so I think that's quite possible that such a thing can happen. But in terms of virtual reality, even you don't even have to go into the virtual reality games. You can
Yeah.
think of a person, a schizophrenic person, as experiencing virtual reality, or you
Yeah.
can think of people who were playing this game like Blue Whale. They were actually experiencing virtual reality, not without even any schizophrenia or any kind of dreamlike scenario. They are actually creating a virtual reality of our own. So we actually create our own virtual
Mm.
reality all the time.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
so so I think that virtual reality is something that is often experienced by people in terms of like, if you look at anybody like who uh, sometimes thinks that India is doing great, right?
Hmm.
India is the best in the world or something. He's in a virtual reality, right?
Yeah.
Or Trump seems to be always in a virtual reality. He thinks America is doing the best uh,
Yeah.
to everything, right? So I think that everybody has his own virtual reality as well.
Hmm. So the whole concept of, let's say, the computational hypothesis, do you think it's just a very interesting philosophical thought, or can we actually draw to conclusion and implications in real life mathematics, computer science, and physics through the idea of, let's say, a computational simulation? Do you think it has any relevance in the real world?
Well, so I think that, so if you look at like things like Gödel's incompleteness theorem, right? So we know that there are formal systems in which you cannot prove your own consistency, or you cannot prove your own theorems, right? So,
Mm.
and you have to go at a meta level to actually make a statement
Yeah.
about that system, right? So it is quite possible that we are not able to formulate what it is, and how, and even if we can formulate what it is, like this thought process we are right now doing, we might not be ever be able to prove it, uh, you know, within the system, right?
Mm.
So so that I think is a thing. Now, now this is the kind of question. So I was so uh, so this kind of questions go actually very close to the metaphysics, right? So
Mm.
I one time I uh, one time I was invited by the National Academy of Sciences in the US to a conference where people like you know uh, uh, top physicists from various like Caltech, from Cornell. They gave
Mm.
talks and all that stuff. And when I was listening to this cosmologists and things, people in physics who are into this, high energy physics, I was listening to them and I was thinking that they were more like religious people than than,
Yeah.
than this, right? So because it's almost metaphysics, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that this is not something is in my capability to actually comprehend, or my I am not. I am more. I like abstract mathematics, but I am not abstract enough to do I either religion or metaphysics or high energy cosmological physics kind of stuff. I think that requires a very special mindset.
Fair enough. But if we have to explore this idea, so so this is about, let's say, mathematics. Do you think that mathematics was created, or was it discovered? Do you think we created mathematics, or do you think it was inherently in the universe and we just happened to discover it?
No, I think well, the concept of ability to quantify things is
Hmm.
something that we have discovered, but how to quantify it is invented, right? So your ability. So for example, you don't necessarily need a decimal system, right? So you can do a binary system, you can have a hexadecimal system, you can have a base whatever system, base p system, right? There are periodic numbers and all that stuff. So I think that the way we have done it is kind of an invention. But
Hmm.
then after in 18th 19th century, there has been a revolution in terms of understanding mathematics and its formalism and its limits of the formalism. All the work by Hilbert and his successors, Bertrand Russell and all that stuff, has been able to actually give a more formalization in which all these inventions actually have been placed in the right framework, right? So what it says is that what basically we learned from them is that there are larger formal frameworks which in which various things could have fit, various ways of creating number system would have fit, but the 10 base 10 number system or the decimal system, etc., are one examples of those, right? Like if you look at the formalisms in terms of fields and
Yeah.
operations and fields and so on. So they're when they went into abstraction of all these things, so that takes you back to the why did the original human beings did it that way. uh, that question becomes a matter of invention rather than discovery, right? So they
Hmm.
invented this way of doing things, uh, and then different areas of the world had slightly different ways of doing it, but then very soon, because of the trade routes and everything, the one that seemed to be more convenient, like use of zero to cycle back the number, the symbols, seem to have gotten traction. And that's why we see that then around the world we have the same number system. So in that sense, I think that the decimal system is not necessarily inherent and discovered. It's probably something that was invented and then propagated. It could have been quite different in terms of what number system we use and all that.
So let's go crazy with this. I've been thinking about something like this for a while now. So it's about, let's say, if an alien species ever comes to visit us, and obviously people have said that languages would be probably a little difficult to speak to them through, because we don't understand what kind of a language they undergo because of how they've undergone evolution and things like that. But because of our trust in mathematics and how we understand the universe, do you think that mathematical language will be a better way to communicate to them than, let's say, any modern language that we have?
Right. So one of the unmanned space mission, I forgot, was it called Vulcan or something, back in 70s or 80s, that was sent, across the solar system. In that, Carl Sagan had put a number of symbols, right? And so it was not human language. It was some gestures, some very old way of representing numbers and things like that. Yeah. So I think that either and then I don't know how evolved an alien species will be. If it is so evolved that it has a very good AI and it can listen to a language for like say a day or two, and then start constructing meaning out of it and all that stuff. Maybe they will have a device by which they will first put that device in and learn a language and then start communicating through that device. Or if they are not that evolved, then it will be like meeting a tribe in Andaman Nicobar area, where you cannot understand each other. Only way to do that would be through gestures and other stuff, and then gradually learn.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting that, like you touched upon, if the alien species is very advanced, then maybe it may take only a day for them to understand our way of comprehending. So this was very interesting. And there's this very powerful documentary on YouTube. It's called AlphaGo. It's based on this game of Go that's played in countries like China, South Korea, Japan. It's a much more complex version of chess, basically, where every single move that you do has 250 possible combinations on the board. And and this company called DeepMind designed an artificial intelligence computer. And without doing anything, they didn't even tell the rules of the game. They let it play on its own, and that particular artificial intelligence machine was able to beat the world champion in Go by 4:1, and that was only through repetition of playing. And the device would only get if it won or lost the match after it played on its own. This is a totally different invention to what, let's say, Gary Kasparov played when IBM created the chess masterpiece, because that was based on how a human percepted things to be right on a chessboard. But this was an artificial intelligence machine almost thinking for itself without knowing the rules of the game. So do you think that it's not too far for, let's say, a computer to think, basically?
Yeah, so I think that so if you think about these are usually done with deep learning, with artificial networks and all that stuff. So what they actually do is that they actually solve an optimization problem, right? So the question is that unlike regular machine learning, here the optimization problem is not set up by us. Here the optimization happens due to the structure of the network that they try to optimize. So this might be the way, so earlier in the early days of AI, for example, Marvin Minsky and all, they used to think about creating a substitute for human brain. But deep learning has really not tried that, right? So they didn't try to actually, although they're using neural network, but it's not really neural network in the sense how the brain works, but more actually the way things actually worked out in terms of getting inputs, creating the most significant signals out of it through some adjustment of weights, and then trying to actually figuring out uh, a way to actually do things. So I think that it is possible that, so right now it seems like deep learning is the way to go in terms of doing things that early AI techniques, like which were based on search, planning, etc., will not is not working, and we are seeing that deep neural networks are doing many things that humans do, like comprehension of faces, creating synthetic music, very similar to what Bach would have created, or Beethoven would have created. So I think that there is a lot of hope rested in these deep learning based methods that we don't fully understand yet. So explainable AI is a new area where people try to understand why the neural network did what it did, the weights, etc., that it settled on. Why did it do that? So unlike other machine learning, statistical machine learning that we were used to before, we knew exactly what it is doing. But here we never know why it is doing it this way. So explainable AI is something people are trying to figure out, like how to explain how it really recognized this something or the other. So I think, yeah. So I think that the machine there, we are basically uh, uh, unleashing machine into doing some stuff with giving it a basic structure, but then the rest is being done automatically, which is both very useful, but it is also scary.
Yeah. No, I mean that's very interesting. You touched upon the whole concept of the work being done in the neurolink sector, of how neural networks rather, of how we're trying to understand, let's say, how our brain works. Do you think
Mhm.
that something like that can possibly hold in let's say the future, where we can where we can maybe wear a cap or a helmet of sorts, and that will maybe draw impulses from what is coming out of the brain? Do you think that is not too far in the future, or do you think maybe we'll never be able to understand our brains?
I think I have seen some articles where they are actually controlling like a prosthetic limb with thoughts and all that stuff. So extracting signal out of the brain to get things done is already happening. So yeah, so I believe that technology will be there. That technology will not be very far. Now the question is whether that technology will give us limitless ability to do things that we cannot do now, or we can only do certain things like face recognition, etc., is to be
Uh,
seen. But certainly, yeah, I mean that whole area of artificial intelligence, neurocognitive science is actually happening big way, especially in places like MIT's, I think,
yeah,
Brain Institute, and few other
deep
places.
learning institute. Yeah. So this brings to this whole interesting question. So if we can place, let's say, an artificial intelligence which will be able to control our body, then does
Mm.
that mean consciousness is something that is present in us, that is a part of our brain, and it's not something that's mystical?
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Yeah,
think
so certainly
consciousness is a
I
part of
don't
our
believe
body,
it's,
or do you think
yeah, I
it's a
don't believe
mystical
that consciousness is mystical, because it goes away as soon as our heart starts pumping. So, uh, so, so I
Yeah,
think
I
it is.
mean, I believe in the same lines because I've heard people who've done psychedelics, and they say that they get some sort of experience after they've done a psychedelic, that it's unworldly. It's something that's very artificial in that sense. But I
Mm.
feel that's only when you take that substance. That's only when you take that psychedelic. That should mean that consciousness is something that's present inside us. It can't be that it's coming from outside and dictating how we should do things or
So
not.
my understanding of psychedelic is that it basically changes the structure, this changes the amounts of
Brain
dopamine
chemistry, yeah.
and serotonin, etc., melatonin, and and then the circuit starts firing, because these circuits in the synaptic gap, when these molecules are present in very large numbers, so this starts firing, and then the brain starts overwhelming our normal brain cognitive process. And then we start like in the sleep we see a lot of things that we cannot explain, right? So this is the kind of thing that the brain has its own way of doing various activities when we are not controlling it. We hardly control it, but at least we try to focus on everything. But if we don't focus, we are completely defocused. Brain does its own things, and I think that is how I think. But all these things are all because we are not brain experts or neuro experts.
We're just a group of, let's say, primates who are trying to figure out what the world is, which is a great, let's say, compliment on our own, because of where we've reached in the evolution cycle, and how we're thinking about the world. So I mean, I don't think we have any right to, let's say, point out what consciousness is if you look at our evolution cycle and things like that. But this comes to the point of how strong is, let's say, our unconscious mind, or do you think there is even a possibility of accessing the part of the unconscious? Do you think that in, let's say, with advancements in the Neuralink sector, that in future, in maybe 10 years, 15 years down the line, we will actually be able to access our unconscious?
Yeah, so it seems to me that what we call unconscious is what is actually not the circuits that are not very active in the brain, right? So circuits that actually have pushed back somewhere, and they are very weakly connected. And if they are properly like for example, you learn you heard some song as a child, and then 30 years later it comes back, somebody sings it, and it all comes back to you. So that's basically we are touching our unconscious. It was somewhere tucked inside the unconscious, and then it is coming to the surface. The circuit starts get a spark, and that spark starts. Now I don't think it is inconceivable to actually be able to tap into the parts of the brain that has been dormant, and that has not that has a very weak connectivity, and reconnect it and things like that. In fact, many psychotherapists actually do that, right? I mean, so after asking proper questioning, lines of questioning, they bring out things that as a child you had experienced, and you don't remember, you didn't remember, you had no conscious remembrance of that, but suddenly it comes to the surface, right? So there are mind techniques also to get to the unconscious. So I think there should be if you can tap signals in brain, and if that sensor technology becomes very minute and very it has the ability to actually pinpoint things inside the brain, to actually, without harming other parts of the brain, maybe you will be able to do that kind of stuff.
Do you see a future where we will only be, let's say, where we will only be conscious in our brain, and our body will be external to us? Let's say how we act on a computer today. Do you think that, let's say, we will be able to control our external body through impulses that we send through?
Oh, I watched a really good movie by Bruce Willis called Surrogates.
Yeah.
So I really like that movie. So yeah, so I think this is also a possibility that we'll have our avatars, which will be actually getting signal from our brain, and will be our actual self maybe actually sleeping somewhere. But I think that will be like hundreds of years from now, not now.
Seriously, because Elon Musk says that, and this is what he believes. I'm not saying that it's true or what. Because of the work he's doing with Neuralink, he says that in 10 years time, maybe 20 years time latest, that we will not have the need to communicate as a human species. He says that communication is a method that is very ineffective. We actually articulate is two different things. What we are maybe thinking isn't fully articulated when we are maybe posing a question or when we're maybe answering to somebody. That's what his line of thinking is, that if we have something like a Neuralink sector done properly, then we won't have the need to communicate, and we will instantaneously know that, let's say I'm sitting across the table to you, I'm able to understand what you're trying to put across.
Yeah. So I think that there is a limitless possibility in terms of once we have more understanding of the brain, and especially if we have the access to various signaling pathways inside the brain and all that stuff, and we can do it safely, because right now, any touch in the brain is very, very dangerous. We don't know how to control things. We may damage neurons, will not degenerate and all that stuff. But if that can happen, then a lot of things we cannot imagine now can happen. The question is, other question is that will happen is that will it be pervasively available, or it will be only be available to a select few?
Yeah, this was a question I wanted to pose basically.
Yeah.
So
that
my understanding was, if
that
we
is that
sorry, yeah.
Anything that happens like that might be actually become very exclusive domain of very rich. But my bigger concern is that by the time all these things could happen, we might destroy the planet and we can actually become extinct. So
that's why we need to go. That's why we need to go to Mars, as Elon Musk is saying.
That's what I don't know. Mars is probably going to be very inhabitable. I don't know, but we'll see. But I don't think I live that long.
So this question of when you're saying that, let's say it will be probably present to the let's say the rich elite of, let's say, the West, or people who are able to access it because of the numerous amount of wealth that they've gathered. Don't you think that will, let's say, create the wealth inequality much greater, because the people will be able, if what we're thinking along those lines, that the neural technology is so advanced that we maybe not be able to move, we don't need to move to access what we are doing in the current scenario. Don't you think that would create a much larger divide between the richest and the poorer of society then, as you mentioned, kind of?
Right now we have an opposing divide, right? So we have in our country, the top 10% has 73% of the wealth, and or more, 77 I think, and 73% of the income goes to the top 1%. So so we already have an obscene amount of inequality. So unless we do something about it and change it, we might actually get into a thorough destruction of ourselves even before all these things happen. But I mean that thing, either any of those things has to happen in a more equitable world. It cannot happen right now the way things are. It's not conducive to either sustainability or survival. So I am hoping that world will become more equitable, and as it becomes more equitable, it probably will be less inequality means that all these things will be more available to more people. But in an ideal world, it should be available to everybody if anything is available, right? Like, so right now, even medical is not available to everybody. So you can imagine what these advanced things will be like.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, and then there's this whole conspiracy theory that there's a small group of people in Silicon Valley who control everything in the world, the intellectual dark web as of sorts, who are
I think that kind of theory has been there even before dark web and before Silicon Valley. There is the notion of Illuminati I have read a lot of books like that based on such things, like something based in Vienna and all that stuff. So I don't believe in such things. I mean, of course, the rich people have their own own lobbying and way their way with the government and everything, but the way things happen, I don't think that it is that coordinated.
See, Sandeep, sir, I wouldn't say that like I totally believe in this, but I can sort of see elements which I find very eerie in society. So when I can see things like Facebook or YouTube promoting only one sort of content on their on let's say YouTube. So when you go onto YouTube and you look for political news or something, you will in the US you'll only get CNN or let's say MSNBC, which is general sites that you get on TV as well. So when you look at independent journalists who are promoting their ideology, which may be totally different to what, let's say, YouTube wants to put out, they are manufactured in a way that it is very difficult for us as normal human beings to find them. So we are sort of getting filtered into what they want to portray, and as a result, the real information isn't being able to come out. Do you think that there is a sort of truth to that?
Yes, but that has to do with the money. So where the revenues are and which catches more eyes,
But
this kind of
sorry to
stuff.
cut you off, but like I think there is a sort of agenda-based thing that's going on here, and I wouldn't say, let's say everything is to some extent has an element of bias in it. But when you see aspects like no other doctor can put out any video to put to say some sort of solution or some sort of thing that an individual should be doing during this coronavirus situation is not allowed to be put out on YouTube until and unless it doesn't meet the WHO criteria. And how can I say that I totally trust in the WHO when I have heard remarks about Taiwan and China that WHO doesn't want to comment about? So how am I as a rational human being able to comprehend that? Does that make sense? I don't think that's
Yeah,
only money
but
that comes
that
into
may
play.
be YouTube protecting itself from being sued for propagating bad, false information. So in case of it is blessed by who, then they can say, well, it's not my fault who said this. But if we allow something to propagate that is totally contrary to what who is saying, and then somebody gets sick out of this, they might sue YouTube, and then YouTube don't want to have any that
But
doesn't.
Sandeep,
I don't actually this. I actually don't even know whether YouTube is actually banning any other content. But if it does, it probably should not. But if it is doing it, it's probably again for some kind of a monetary interest that is not to be sued and being having to pay a lot of money where they can fall back on who or somebody to say that, well, this video is who certified content, that
but
video arbitrary content.
Sandeep, sir, we can live in a world where we have, let's say, where we go to YouTube, because YouTube is an access where I can maybe hold my phone up to my face and click the record button and say something, and my thoughts will be out to the world.
Right.
That does hiding my information. So when a general person logs onto YouTube and watches a video, he wouldn't and takes it down. He wouldn't say that, oh, that's because of YouTube. YouTube are putting that across. That's because of my channel, right? Isn't that what the case is? So if they're only promoting one ideology, then doesn't that, let's say, lessen our knowledge in some way, shape, or form? Because we've seen this in political standpoints as well, that only a radical leftist agenda is put forward.
I think the censorship is always a bad thing. I think that the question is there are many things that these companies do or have to do. For example, if thousands of people report it, often they take it out. Doesn't mean that the content was wrong. The content was actually not proven to be wrong, but thousand people says I'm offended by this content, right? So then they take it out, right? So I'm not sure how we can, whether we should tell YouTube that you should not take out any content, but then there will be a lot of contents like hate mongering and communal messages and misinformation like drink cow urine to cure yourself of corona and all that stuff can also be put out, right? So I think that that's a very difficult job for, I guess, YouTube and all the others to, when they are become a platform, they have to, um, yeah, so they have to make a decision somehow or the other. So what in summary, what I'm trying to say is that I'm not sure that there is an Illuminati kind of conspiracy that is leading to Facebook or YouTube doing things. I think most of the time they're doing it for money and monetary reasons. So money is a big incentive for all of those, right? So
yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But when you're talking about, let's say, the cow urine aspect and like the flat Earth society and these kind of, let's say, totally stupid ideas that are there on YouTube, maybe YouTube just lets it to be there because they understand that that's too stupid for anyone to even believe in, let's say, the flat Earth society or cow or drinking cow urine will purify you or something like that. So
no,
I think,
if enough people send out reports, I think they will be taken down. The question is not a lot of people bother to do it.
right. Listen, Sandeep, sir, this has been a great time speaking to you. It was a pleasure
Yes.
talking about aspects such as consciousness and artificial intelligence. I hope we can do this sometime in person when you're maybe in Delhi or when I visit Kanpur, actually. So yeah, it was a pleasure speaking to you. For the viewers, if they would like to find your work, where can they do so? And if you want to plug any social media sites of yours, please feel free.
So they can search me on Google and my work website will pop up. So I think that's the easiest way to get to me.
Right, right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you. It was a great. I had a great conversation speaking to you, and hope we can do this sometime again.